let's begin. And then, so last week we looked at the data, and so we may, I guess, if you want, we could try to read in that transactions data and see if we have any better luck, and then I could, try to save it in a better format for you. And then roughly the plan today was to talk about APIs. So I've put together a handful of public APIs that we can use, and we can make requests to. So let's why don't we just jump in? Well, how about you, Charles and Jake? Which would you prefer to start with?
I'm fine with either one. If you could, how much memory do you have in your machine?
Here is David. Oh, there's a good amount, not an excessive amount. But good morning, David.
Morning.
Because I have 32 gigabytes in both my machines, and that was like not enough.
Do you know how large the actual file was that you were trying to read in?
It's supposed to be like 24 or 26 gigabytes, but when it's read into the CSV editor, it expands, and I don't know if that's part of because it's corrupted, or if that's what a CSV file expands that much when you read it in.
Well, let's just take a quick look at that here. Let me just condense some of these things here, and then...
Might be just the editor.
Now, I tried like 2 different editors.
Really?
The main problem is that pandas won't read it in.
Oh. But if you open it up in Notepad, does it, or a text editor, does it expand like that?
I haven't tried reading it using a text editor. I've been using like a CSV reader.
I would try it with Notepad, something that just reads text, and it isn't supposedly specialized for CSV, and see what happens. That would help isolate whether or not it's the editor or whether it's something to do with CSVs. I've never seen that occur with just Notepad.
Right. So I'll just for 5 minutes, we'll just take a quick look at it. So here I'm going to drop some links in the chat, and so these are the data links.
And Jake is new here. He's my .NET developer.
Oh, awesome.
So I don't know if he's on the audio or not, but
I'm here.
okay. Good morning, Jake.
Good morning.
And then I should have shared this last time. Charles was smart to bring this up. So this is the data guide for the data. So we
That was really helpful.
so the fields that we're looking at. Okay, so say one more time you were looking to read in the transfers.
No, the inventories.
Oh, okay, 2 gigs, so it should be manageable.
Well, it is zipped, so it's gonna uncompress the zip file. It'll probably get bigger when you uncompress it. How big is the CSV after you unzip it?
It's like 24 or 26 gigabytes.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll look at this maybe at the end of the presentation. So we'll just dive straight into APIs, and then maybe at the end we'll see if we can't have any luck parsing that for you, Charles. So some of the things I wanted to share with you today. First, just wanted to just spend. So here's the agenda. So I was just maybe going to do 5 to 10 minutes of introductions, but it looks like we've got the usual crowd here, plus Jake, and so it's good to see you all. And then I guess real quick, Jake, you said you're a developer, and then
Yes.
and then could I just ask, do you have any particular interests in the field of cannabis data? that you're looking
Yeah,
to?
we're interested in developing an add-in for Acumatica's ERP so that all the touch points for the growing and manufacturing processes can all be have all their IDs captured from the API and then be able to send the information back to the state through the API as those transactions are occurring. So we sell that particular ERP software, so we know that side. Jake's done a lot of development within the application in C#. So we're just kind of looking and exploring how we could potentially build something that would let the ERP system do everything that growers and processors need it to do, including the communications with the state API, kind of
Excellent.
behind the scenes. So that's kind of he's working on a major project right now for an investment asset accounting within our ERP, but that's going to be, we're going to have minimum viable product on that pretty soon, and then he's going to be looking at developing this next big product of ours for the cannabis industry to allow us to target cannabis growers and manufacturing or processing plants.
Well, you're in the perfect place, and we're glad to share as much as we know. So, as you hit on, APIs are used by by pretty much every state that's adopting a cannabis program. So it looked like, for example, Oklahoma was maybe going to go without, and then they adopted metric recently. So, and then I put a list of states here to watch out for public data, because these are states that are at least making efforts to start providing public data, even if at the moment the infrastructure is still in development. So, for example, Washington, I was just pulling it up over here, but but we'll dig into some of these others. So Washington has a Socrata endpoint. It was rich with cannabis data, and they've recently announced that they're going to have efforts this year to start populating more data there. So something to look out for. And then one of the ones that's up and running, well, so we'll stay tuned. Okay, but one of the ones that is up and running is we have the pesticides from Oregon. So this will just be a quick example of how you can get data through Socrata. Okay. So, I'll put the link in the chat. And so, it seems that a lot of these states are adopting Socrata for sharing their data. Slowly but surely. And so, for example, here's an effort by Oregon to share their pesticide lists. And so this is a public API endpoint. So really, if you hit this URL with any programming language or even in the browser, you should just get a big dump of data. And then, so that's not too meaningful there in the browser. So what we've done here is we'll start a new file just to do everything fresh here. So we'll go ahead and use the request package for Python. And then we'll be hitting the pesticides endpoint. And we use requests .get to get that endpoint. And then a couple tools that you could potentially look into using if you're not trying to a tool recommended to me was Postman, so you could look into using Postman, but just for this tutorial, I'll be sticking here in Spider. Okay, so you'll get a successful response if you have a 200 status code. And so then you can then get that actual data. And so this is just going to be a giant list of dictionaries. So just so we can, clean this data up and save it to Excel, because I should have mentioned the point of this exercise is, basically we're just trying to get as much cannabis. Here I said lab results, but we'll just generalize to data. So our goal is to get as much cannabis data as possible from public APIs, and then save it to Excel, or your favorite database, right? So that way you can make it useful to yourself. All right, so we'll need pandas. And then what I'm doing here is you can turn a list of dictionaries into a data frame by simply passing it to pd.dataframe. And if you look at the data, because that's the first rule of data science, look at the data. So if you look at the data, you'll see that everything's in all capital letters. So just to save people a headache, you can check out the link here to Stack Overflow, where we're basically just turning everything to title case. So that way the data is prettier. And so then we can save that to Excel. And you have a nice list of pesticides that may be used on cannabis products. So essentially, if a cannabis producer was going to use, Velafir, then they're going to want to know what the active ingredients are and watch for those. So for example, if you're using anything with Azera, you're going to want to watch out that your products don't fail for pyrethrins when being tested. I think flour may not have a limit on pyrethrins in Washington State, but concentrated products would. So if you're growing products that are going to be getting concentrated, then you may want to be careful with your application of any pesticides with active ingredients that you're trying to avoid. So that's just a quick look at those pesticide data points. And just to go ahead and show you one more API, just for fun. So this is an API that I've put together that allows you to get actual lab data. So at the moment, you can just get information about particular labs. So I'll put the link in the chat here. Okay. And so we're going to do a similar thing where we're going to get the data. So here's the labs endpoint, api.canlytics.com/v1/labs. We're going to use requests, and then we're going to get the JSON. So there are about 100 so I have 140 or so in the database at the moment, and then I've got a total of 225 that I'm looking to add. So if we just look at this data, so we're returning a dictionary, and the dictionary has a single key of data, which has all the lab data. So what does it look like in full? A big messy dictionary, but you can get particular. So that's just a singular, so we can look at it a slightly nicer way. And so this is a singular lab. So, what's their name? So that's Peak Analytical. I think you can get things like full address. I forget. No.
Alaska.
Yeah. It's formatted address. So that way you can get the full address. And then I think there's even some nifty data points on here. So I think I've got, so for some of these labs, I've gone ahead and geocoded them for you. And then when possible, I've got their website, their image, or a link to their image, and then their phone number where possible. And so these are things that these labs would like public, so it's on their website. They want people to get their phone number. So this is just an easy access way to get this data. And then once again, you can just dump it to Excel. So that way, you have a nice, you have a nice list of all. And so these are all the labs that test for cannabis in any given state. So if you're looking for labs in Washington, you can you can find essentially the general information about these labs. And so stay tuned, because the idea is, to gradually build out this API endpoint to provide the actual lab results, which we were working with in the last exercise. And this is a public project, so if anyone wants to, to lend a hand, you're more than welcome. So that's that endpoint. And then just sort of show you just a myriad of some of the possible data points out there. If you go to Socrata, you can find, just lists of public data that can be accessed all in similar formats. So, and then do the pesticide data. Oh, yes. Here is an interesting. So I'm just going to share these APIs with you, and then we can maybe spend a minute to talk about the Washington State APIs or any other traceability system that you may be interested in.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it too. What we are probably going to do is in the Acumatica ERP, we're going to add custom columns to their data for we'll probably still track our own ID numbers, but we'll create an extra column which will be the state ID number for all of the different records, whether it be vendors or batches or plantings, all of the different things that we're required to get ID numbers from. We're probably going to store in separate columns, and that way we can support different states. Right, so if we have a column for the Washington ID versus the California ID versus the Colorado ID, then we can build our APIs, our connections to each of the different state APIs depending on which state that they're in, and leave the others blank if, because we can have a setup option that says what state they're in.
Well, awesome. So let me put this on pause for 1 second, and then I'm going to grab my tea, and then we can dive into this Leaf user manual.
I like it. I'm going to grab coffee. So
All right.
A good coffee break.
Awesome. Let's grab tea. 1 second.
Charles, where are you located?
Portland.
Portland. Awesome. 2 hours down I-5.
Yeah. So did you have you had power up there? Or?
We never lost it in Tacoma. There were some areas around us because of when we had the snow. Fortunately, the snow only lasted a day or two, and we're pretty lucky. I'm a paranoid guy who believes the grid is going to become more and more unstable in this country. So I went out and got a natural gas powered standby generator for our house. So even if the power does go out, I can still be online helping clients as long as we don't have like the 10.0 earthquake that takes out all the gas piping, breaks all the gas pipes, we'll be fine. I can't do anything about that though. If the 10.0 earthquake comes, we're pretty much all screwed.
Well.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. So thanks for bearing with me. I noticed the tea was boiling, so I had to go get that. But cheers.
Cheers.
To a good meeting. All right.
What we were looking to see is if you can give us an example of how you would connect to their API and get back an ID number for, let's say, something as simple as a vendor, right? We're adding a vendor. We need a state vendor ID with the state of Washington, right? Assigned by their API.
Sure. So,
How would we call and do that? I'm assuming there's some kind of authentication piece first.
ooh, so
Go ahead.
why don't, or unless you want to, yeah, you're right. There is an authentication piece. So why don't we jump into this documentation, and
Okay.
we'll go through, and you can hit me with some bullet points, and I'll just sort of mock an API request, and then
Okay.
I was trying to so I learned about Postman just for hitting API endpoints, but it looks like you can actually mock API endpoints here on Postman. So
Really?
exactly. So if you would like, I didn't have enough time to get it prepared for this week, but we'll start going through the document, the leaf traceability system
Okay.
API here, and essentially gradually build a mock API here for the leaf data systems, because we've got the data here. So, it would maybe be cumbersome to do a full, like a full mock, but, you could potentially take a, random sampling out of all of these, and because these are essentially all the endpoints.
Right. These are all the things that are having to be reported, right? So if there should be a vendor one there.
So let's just scroll through the.
Last time I looked at this documentation, there was something here, but I could not get through it.
Okay. So
Very much.
yeah, so I'll kind of just give you a brief overview here, and then, like I said, over the course of the next couple meetups, I'll essentially random sample these, and we'll essentially create a mock of the Washington State API. That way, people, people like you who are building a company to interact with the traceability system can get some practice in, and figure out how to do things. So okay. So what is the traceability system? So so essentially they're tracking things from when it's planted to when it gets sold. So I may send you a diagram of this where I've written on it, because there's some interesting things you can add to this. So essentially,
Would the users be like vendors and other people that you're interacting with?
Good question. So
Okay.
everybody who uses the state traceability system creates users. So
Okay.
so all licensees create users. So that would be the retailers, the producers, the processors, and the labs.
Okay.
And then once you create your users, you essentially create what are called areas. So you're basically creating a blueprint of your lab. So
Kind of like a warehouse having locations or bins within a warehouse, maybe.
exactly. And so this is for traceability purposes. So So you don't want to trip yourself up because these are things that you define. So if you're a retailer, you may have the front room, the back room,
Right.
or if you're a wholesale, if you're a producer, you may have flower room, veg room, or if it's a
Right.
large cultivator, they may have flower room 1, flower room 2, veg
That's
room.
what I'm familiar with. I worked with Tilray back when they were first getting started, and that's what they kind of had. They had a whole bunch of different rooms for different stages and
Ooh, and this is
batches.
and this is a word of wisdom, is always prepare for multiples.
Yeah.
It Even if it's a small company and they may only have one user, one area, or even one licensee, there are large companies out there. So always be prepared for multiple. So be prepared for multiple licensees. Just just Yeah, so that's the big
Yeah.
one. Multiple licensees. That's the
Okay.
trickiest. That's the trickiest thing to prepare for. But if you can handle that, then you're golden.
Okay.
So, and then this is where I would like to start making some notes because essentially,
Well, we could just do an ad of an area. I mean, once we spec out the process for submitting your area and getting back a state ID for that area, I'm assuming that's how the API works. Because they've got to keep some unique identifier for each of the records you're creating, right?
ooh, so before we get head over heels, why don't we essentially. So, unfortunately, we won't get responses, but I can still show you how to set up the requests.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
so
We,
that
we can do
way,
that with anything, I
yeah.
guess.
Well,
User.
that's exactly. So we'll start from the beginning, and just
Awesome.
and
Yeah.
just work our way up.
Okay.
So let's see if we can't split this up nicely here, and let's see if we can't get rid of this bookmark thing. All right. So how I would do it in Python. So of course you're just going to need the base endpoint here. So that's going to be the. Unfortunately, some of the things are hard to copy and paste. So essentially, your base endpoint is. I'll paste it into the chat here in a second, but it's HTTPS WA test. So this will be the test environment. leafdatasystems.com API v1 and so that's basically just the API, the base URL of the test API.
Okay.
Okay, so I think you would essentially just make a so say you wanted to get users, you would just so you would do that, but you're going to need some sort of authentication. So we got a little ahead of ourselves. So let's go back. And actually, a better resource may be
Oh, I thought I saw third-party developers.
at the bottom.
Go down a little bit farther. I thought there was a manual if you have. Oh, okay, third-party integrators web form. Never mind.
Okay. Here we go. So these are essentially the headers you want. So the way you pass authentication and requests, I'm sure you know, but part of me is just speaking to a general audience here, so bear with me since I'm sure you know. But you pass in some headers here, and this is basically going to be a dictionary where you would pass in your API key. And so this may be this is programming language specific here. So the way you pass your headers will vary slightly depending on your approach.
Yeah.
But these are essentially the fields that you would want. So you want X, MJF. So that's MJ Freeway, which is the original name of Akerna, which is the parent company of Leaf Data Systems, which is the traceability system in Washington State. So you hear people use a lot of terminology. So that you may hear people in Washington call this MJ Freeway. You may hear them call it Leaf Data Systems. You may just hear them refer to it as traceability.
Got it.
So,
yeah, I've heard MJ Freeway. Yep.
Exactly. And so, okay, and then you get your, so you're going to need to get your API key. And this is actually, one of the easier parts. So you'll apply to become a software integrator, and then they'll give you access to the environment.
Can you go back up to that list? I think I may have already applied for that. Hold on a second. No, I guess not. ICANN software is not on the list. Okay.
Well, and they may just not have updated their list, so it could be worth shooting them an email. But in the API system, I believe you can So you'll have to get your API key from within the system itself. I'm sure you'll have to go to like settings or something like that, user profile, and find your API key.
Okay.
And then the MME code is a little tricky here. So So in fact, the MMEs are essentially their own endpoint. So one thing you will actually want to, familiarize yourself with, because this is going to be useful, is you're gonna want to hit this MME's endpoint here, and so so let's just do like a quick mock of what this would look like. Okay, so you've got your base. Coincidentally, you're going to have to already know your company's MME ID. And so the way you would essentially go about that is there is a user interface to the Leaf Data Systems API. So what I would recommend is essentially just using the user interface, finding finding your MME ID, or even yeah. So so that's the tricky part, the chicken and the egg. So you need to so you essentially so that's what I would recommend. Use the user interface, get that first MME ID, and then
Yeah, from a
essentially.
code standpoint, we would have the client look that up for themselves, right, and enter it in, store it in a table somewhere that we could reference it going forward. Yeah, okay, I'm with you.
Well, exactly. So if you're coming at it from a business point of view, so you're basically going to need your client to enter in their API key and
Right.
and their MME code in your system.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and so if you look here, the MME code is the global ID in this response.
Oh, it's not the ID; it's the global ID. Okay. Okay.
Exactly. And this is different than their license number. So their license number will actually be down here in bio license number.
Got
And it may or may not have an it may or may not be alphanumeric. So it may have, for example, an M in front of the number if they're a manufacturer, or an R if they're a retailer.
it. Gotcha. Okay.
But essentially, this is a little bit of point of a confusion, because you'll need this MME code as you're going through the various as you're going through the workflow. So for different endpoints, you may need that ID, and it's not the end of the world, but it's just, you just have to either have this saved in your database, or hit the MME's endpoint and get the global ID, because, for example, it may be used when you're transferring products from from one company to the next.
Right. Exactly. Okay.
Okay.
So we get an MME, and then next in the flow was areas.
Ooh.
There should be like a submit for the area, right?
Ooh, yeah. Okay, so essentially we've got that. You may even end up creating your users in the user interface. So that they may or may not exist, but you can also make them programmatically. And so
Did you have a or do they provide in their documentation example of submitting a user ID create type function, or is it just lookup with get?
actually,
Should be like
I'm
a
think
post.
You know, I, s- I want to say there should be a post ability, but it's not in the
That's what I
document.
thought.
It's
Yeah,
not.
it's crazy, right? That they don't. I didn't see anything in there with the post documentation.
So I'm wondering if the users may have to be created through the user interface. So
Uh,
that is a possibility because there are.
but but you've got to have some ability to post for every transaction, for every lot, right? The lot number or the lot ID has to be assigned by the state, so we have to be able to, as we're creating lots, or as we're creating even areas, right? The areas are user defined. Um, there's got to be a way to do a post on this to say, give me an ID for this area that I'm going to call, flower room one, right? I mean, that's what APIs have. They have gets and they have posts. Um, so it seems crazy to me that they're not providing that.
Well, let's see. Little
Well, they have a
functions.
create. Okay, there's create.
Yeah. So that's a good question. So that's one that I may need to just try to discover an answer for you for next week
Okay.
because so for example,
Oh, there it is.
yeah, so the areas are created just, the areas are one of your simpler objects, really. So, you're just doing, once again, so the areas will be a post. So, like you said. And then, base plus areas. And then I want to say you can just pass, data.
Yeah. The only thing that in my mind that I'm thinking there needs to be, does the authentication in the first part where you do the base and then you do the headers equal, does that essentially accomplish the authentication so it knows which licensee is creating the area? Right. So I guess
Exactly, because
okay.
you're only your data that you're yeah, the data you're passing in there, you're essentially just passing it an object here,
Right.
that just area, and it's actually a list of areas where you could create.
One after the other. You can do or one post and give them all your areas.
Exactly. So that way you
Right.
can you can populate the whole facility in one shot.
Okay. Hey Jake, we'd probably do it one at a time simply because it would be on the save of the area within Acumatica.
Yeah, and
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
and
Sounds about right.
and that was my sort of comment is I would take increased functionality I mean increased like fields and endpoints over necessarily being able to do multiple areas at a time. But
Yeah.
you
Yeah, from a code standpoint, it just makes sense to do it each one, have a post for each one.
but nonetheless, I was even maybe telling someone the other day that I'm a glass half full type of person, and there's a lot of complaints about the Washington State traceability system. But at the end of the day, you just have to use what you're given, and make if you have lemons, try to make lemonade. So it's like, you know, it is what it is, but you can still interact with it programmatically. So that's the important part. So,
Yeah.
um,
In a perfect world, we'd be like Canada, um, where they don't require you to use as extensive of a reporting system. In fact, I don't even know if they have an API that you have to comply with in Canada with Tilray. Um, they approached it from the standpoint of you take care of the tracking, but when we come in and audit you, if we go to a room and compare it to what your tracking system says and it's different, you lose your license. um, and I kind of appreciate that because if you have a good system, you it's a lot easier to implement manufacturing and ERP and with cannabis up in Canada because of that, right? I mean, you don't have to make an API call for everything that you save, all these different records, right? You just have to prove that you have traceability within your own system, and there's a big hammer if you don't. you know, um, Nobody wants to lose a lot. Tilray doesn't want to lose their license to operate in Canada, right? So,
well, that's a real interesting perspective, because you're right. Because they still sort of have uh, the panopticon where you don't know when you're going to get inspected.
yeah,
Um,
right. It's
and
like the IRS, right? It is kind of a, hey, we're going to trust you to, first you got to prove you have a system right before you can get a license up there. So we had to prove that we had traceability with the financial system. But once you prove it and you get your license, then they just do, occasional checks. And it's that, fear in our heads of that occasional check being catastrophic, right? That's why we have insurance, right? We want to make sure we don't lose everything. And so it certainly makes implementing cannabis, for companies in business software significantly easier up there.
yeah, and
But like you said, it is what it is in the state of
yeah,
Washington, right?
well,
You got to deal with what you got, and
well,
because we have kind of a screwy country where every state is different, and every state potentially has a different API, you got to work with that too. So,
my,
yeah,
my perspective is, so there's a point of contention in Washington because the state views it as, oh, this is for traceability, just to, make sure that, nothing's going out of the system. But, some people rely on it as sort of like an inventory management system. And, your inventory is there, but it's not really, managing anything.
right.
So,
Most of them are using QuickBooks and then using the state API for their tracking of inventory.
exactly. So I kind of approached it as, you run the business first and then make sure that you're compliant with traceability second. Just, just so you're not, building your business too much off of, too solely, because you don't want to, you don't want to get stuck in some of the paradigms that they've necessarily chosen for their system.
Yeah.
And then it seems, I don't actually know too much about metric, but it seems maybe it's slightly more features, and it seems that people are maybe relying on it as an inventory management system where,
That's what I've heard. I've heard it's much better,
but
not only to integrate with, from a standpoint of development, but also, and I think documentation is better on the metric system as opposed to MJ Freeway.
but
I
yeah,
think MJ Freeway kind of has their own ERP software that they're allowing people to use, and that's probably what you mean by them tracking the inventory in the API is they offer kind of a web ERP system or a financial system and a warehouse system and a manufacturing system,
but
kind of all within their software that you pay for to use.
But
So I think you're right.
but it's still same thing. Even if it's made more features, I would still be hesitant to, build my business or software entirely based on their paradigm because, everybody wants to do things differently. So,
Yeah. What do you think
but
the
that's my
odds
two
are
cents.
that Washington stays with MJ Freeway? Um,
It's a good question. I don't have my ear quite to the ground these days, but
okay.
I don't know. It seemed for a second that they may be looking into alternatives, but I don't know. It seems so. My personal perspective is it does seem like there's a lot of complaints, and some of them may be legitimate. But at the end of the day, at least it's a system. So I think really, like realistically, the alternative would be like going back to like Excel workbooks and things like that, which
You don't think they'd ever go to metric?
I don't. I actually don't know enough about that. So,
Okay, no
but
worries.
for some reason, just from what I've gathered, maybe it's too expensive, or I'm not sure if that's it. Maybe it's. It
Yeah,
just
probably
doesn't
is.
seem like they were really considering that. But like I said, I don't really have that much of a. I'm not. I would love to be a fly on the wall sometimes in some of those
Yeah,
meetings. Um,
absolutely.
but
Okay.
but
Can you show us a little more of the Postman interface? That kind of caught
yeah
my eye, my
yeah
interest.
yeah. So here, why don't I kind of just show you a bit of this, and then for next week I'll have some of this up and running, so that way we could actually do some mock create areas, and since it's a mock, we could create post requests for the users, whether the actual system has that or not.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
but but I was actually recommended this by people I work with. They use Postman for you know essentially just developing APIs. So when you're building an API and you need to test it and you just want to, hit your endpoints, this is just, essentially, um, I've created an account here just today, but it looks like you can, make requests. Um, so let's see. So create a request. So let's see if here in 2 minutes we can't figure this thing out real quick. So,
Okay.
so I think yeah, you can So let's do the pesticides one, just because that was, a pretty simple endpoint to, just to see if it works. I think you can basically, yeah. So, oh, nice, and it'll prettify it for you. So,
Nice.
so you'll need to, go to postman.com, create an account, and then from the dashboard, I can maybe type up some instructions for you. But
Can you select the post instead of get on that?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, so this is a pretty rich tool. Like I said, I haven't. I still need to explore it yet because, like I said, um,
Yeah, I
the,
bet if you looked at the documentation, like if we were looking at the one for the state of Washington on the users or the areas, I bet you have to type in manually the parameter keys based off the documentation manual. But then, yeah, you should be able to.
yeah, so
Huh.
essentially, where did I have this guide? Yeah, so essentially,
And they have an authentication tab, so you probably are able to put in the authorization information headers in there as well.
So essentially, you'd make your post, and then, so I wonder, your key would be area, and then I wonder if there's any way to make this like a list. So maybe tricky using Postman, so I may need to figure out.
Yeah, no worries.
But
we can look at it next week.
But so how about this? How about, yeah, for next week, I'll start playing around with this, and
Yeah.
we'll just mock some of these endpoints, because they're relatively simple and they're giving us everything we need, because in this guide you basically have your request,
Yeah.
whoops, the
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
We got to get going. It's
Oh yeah,
9:30.
oh yeah. Here, I'll let you all get going. But essentially, that's the plan for next week. Is so today was just an intro, and then next week we'll actually jump in the deep end. So awesome.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everyone.
Okay,
Thank you very
bye.
much.
All right, see you next
Bye.
week. Bye.
See you next week.
Hey, see you. Ooh, and Charles, why don't I? Because, like you said, I'm a little worried about that memory. So I don't want everything to crash while that was actually my fear, is that everything was going to crash right when I try to read in that data set. So if you'd like, I can try to wrangle that and send it to you in a better format or more consumable way, if you would like.
Yeah, that would be great. You know what it is? I can read it in, and then you can chop off that corrupted column. But then when I go to save it, is when it crashes.
Well, and say that one more time. It was the inventories and the
inventories. The plants one
The
was
plants.
corrupted, but I was able to fix that.
Okay.
That one I was able to read in, chop off the extra column, and then save it. But inventories, you can read it in, it takes forever. And then I was able to chop off the column. Actually, there was 2 extra columns. I was able to chop those off, and then when I went to save them, then that's when it would crash.
Well, I'll try to tackle that today for you and send you either my findings or some results.
Okay, great.
All right.
I appreciate that.
All right, Charles. Well, I've got a full agenda today myself, so I'm gonna go ahead and go myself. But it's awesome, talking about cannabis data with you. So I'll look forward to getting back at it next week with you.
Okay, yeah, great. I'll see you next week.
All right, I'll be in touch.